Welcome to On Campus at SUNY New Paltz, a show about its community and wonderful people in the community. I'm your host, Abigail Robin, and today we're going to be speaking with Beth Wilson, who curated this incredible show for Samuel Dorsky Museum called Taking a Different Tack. And it is a Maggie Sherwood and the Floating Foundation of Photography show, all about this great endeavor that Maggie Sherwood took upon herself. And her son, Steve Schoen, who is wearing an incredible jacket. I wish we could get up and look at it, but this is a jacket, Steve. Tell us a little bit about this jacket.
Well, a good friend of mine, a wonderful modern artist, Steve Kerner, and his wife, Connie Kerner, who used to have her own fashion company and design clothing, made this for me for the opening.
And what does this reflect here?
It's a collage of 35 of my mother's photographs.
35 of Maggie Sherwood's photographs, which were exhibited at times on a purple boat, and that's the reason that we're all wearing purple today. We didn't realize this, but so how did this whole notion of taking a different tack come about?
Well, the exhibition was originally sorted out by Neil Traeger, who has recently retired as director of the Samuel Dorsky Museum. I had introduced Neil to Steve and his wife, Joni Miller, having known them for a number of years. And I curated a show a few years ago at the museum, another big photography show, called The Material Image, and we borrowed 8 or 9 photographs from their collection for that show, which sort of initiated a relationship with the museum and between the museum and the Floating Foundation. And Neil then subsequently decided to do this. He wanted to do an exhibition just about the Floating Foundation. Right. So he got it started, and then he retired, and I sort of picked up the reins.
And the Floating Foundation still exists, doesn't it? Except it's on land. In where?
Well, I mean, our headquarters are in High Falls.
In High Falls, so it's really a local endeavor at this particular moment. So tell us, what is this floating? Why did Maggie, your mom, decide to do this? And you've written a wonderful introduction, so pitch in, both of you, and tell us about Maggie, who really deserves to be applauded.
Well, I guess the basic start of the story was in 1969. Maggie Sherwood, who was a very active photographer, engaged with a really interesting circle of people in New York City, including especially Lisette Modell, who's a pretty famous photographer, and Jean Smith, who's also very well known, and a number of others. I mean, her teacher was David Vestal, and there was this really kind of interested, engaged circle of photographers in New York that Maggie was part of. And one of the things that's really important about it, in 1969 she bought a houseboat.
Yes, I understand. In Maryland, she schlepped it all the way to New York to get it put in the boat basin, which was amazing, and then painted it purple. And
they built a second story on the boat. So the upper story was intended as sort of a gallery exhibition space, and the downstairs, I mean, you could exhibit things, but also there was seating and people could hang out, and there were books.
With wicker chairs.
With wicker chairs, which we've reproduced part of that as a conversation circle in the exhibition.
Yes,
so there's a space for people to sit down and look at photo books and think about the show and talk about whatever they want to talk about.
And that generation, I mean, we're looking at the end of the 60s, great re-evolution. I won't say revolution, but we're looking at lots of things going on, lots of under the ground, so to speak, movements, right? All kinds of exciting things. The Rockefeller drug laws, and there's a interesting photograph, one photograph, and who is that by?
That was Richard Conroy.
No,
with the mask.
Yes, the mask.
No, that's not Conroy. That's Bruce, I think.
Oh, Bruce. Yeah, Bruce did the photograph, but Richard's the one with the mask.
Wearing the mask.
It was his idea for the photograph.
In Greenhaven Prison. So this was the whole notion of bringing people who didn't have a voice. Most photographers at that point really didn't have a voice. Only the Museum of Modern Art was doing photography, right, at that time?
Well, I mean, there were, amazingly enough, in 1969-70, when the Floating Foundation got started, there were no commercial photography galleries in New York. None.
None.
There had been a place called the Limelight, which was a coffee house in Greenwich Village that was run by a woman named Helen G. And that had opened in the 50s and closed, I believe it was 61, something like that.
Wow.
And there was nothing after that really as a kind of fairly dedicated space just to show photography. So there was a need for an exhibition space and for a place for photographers to get together to form a community. And so that was one of the really important things that the Floating Foundation contributed at this point.
The place.
A physical location for all of this to take place.
Right.
Just a few years later, there started to be galleries opening up in the city. And this was just this very moment when photography as a medium started gaining momentum and taking off as an artistic medium.
Yeah. And the technology is really fascinating about photography and the evolution and how quickly things happen, but we can talk about that another time. Let's talk more about the show. Who's represented? There are so many different artists. Tell us, Steve.
Well, I mean, the show evolved from the collection that we had. And the collection really developed from photographers that we gave one-man shows to one-woman shows on the boat. So a lot of photographers would give us prints after their exhibition on the boat. We had a very strong group of photographers that really supported the foundation.
And you had apprenticeships, people opening up their studios to teach more photographers, right?
Well, that was sort of the practice at the time. Most photographers were learning, but like students of Lisette Modell were hanging out at her studio and learning from her, or,
apprenticeship program.
Well, but not exactly a formal program. I mean, it sort of worked like an apprenticeship. I mean, it wasn't. Most photography education on the level that we're talking about wasn't happening in formal educational institutions at that point.
Right.
It was still in this kind of, working with an established photographer kind of thing.
Well, we really felt that our boat could function to bring photography anywhere.
Which it did.
And it did, and particularly to isolated communities. That was my real interest. And when we first brought the boat to the 79th Street Boat Basin, first they wouldn't let us dock there. The boat was painted purple, and the head of the boat basin said if we painted it white that we could bring it there because he was afraid of accidents from the West Side Highway seeing our boat. So we called Carol Greitzer, who we didn't know, and said to her that it's color discrimination.
I love that. Yeah.
The next day, the head of the boat basin called us and said, no problem, you can bring the boat, because his was a contract with the city to have that boat basin.
Oh, wow.
And we got to bring the boat there, and we shared the pier with Malcolm Forbes. There were only 2 boats on that pier.
Oh, wow.
And we were the only public vehicle in the boat in the boat basin that allowed the public to come. It was a very closed community. Most of the people in the boat basin were rather wealthy.
Right, Forbes,
like Forbes.
Right.
He blew a whistle, and out came his crew that lined up by his 100-foot yacht.
And there was Maggie, huh?
And here was our purple 2-story houseboat.
Right.
Just slightly unconventional, with plexiglass bubbles and a hole cut through the first floor so you could see the gallery up above.
Wow.
And I would be there, and people were walking along in the park there at 79th Street Boat Basin, and a couple of girls came by, and I said, why don't you come and look at the boat? And I asked them what they did, and one of them worked at Bellevue Hospital. And I said, why don't you bring your patients? And they brought a group of patients to the boat. And I had some cameras I had gotten from Polaroid for teaching, and at the time I was teaching in Joan of Arc Mini School and a lot of other schools, independent schools, experimental schools.
You were really bringing it to the people.
Absolutely.
Yes, good.
And I developed a teaching program, which I started with the Polaroid camera because I got immediate results. And it was something simple to use. And then we went on to the Diana F, which was at the time a $1 plastic camera that you could easily do multiple exposures
Look
with.
at what we have today. Digital cameras, all kinds of stuff. We're gonna come back to you, okay? Gotta take a little break, so we'll be right back.
I'm so glad I've chosen the School of Business at SUNY New Paltz. So far, I've taken classes in marketing, management, accounting, finance.
My professors have worked in all facets of business. They helped me in the classroom and by getting me involved in programs outside the classroom.
I learned from faculty and students from all over the world.
The students, the faculty, and the dean all work together. It's like a family. SUNY New Paltz, the preferred business school of the Hudson Valley.
Welcome back to On Campus, a wonderful show about our community. And we were talking with Steve talking about his outreach to the prisons. And how did that happen? How did you get into the prison, so to speak?
Yeah, it actually pretty much happened by chance. We heard about the Council on the Arts. My mother had started this foundation, and we really had no funding. And she saw it as a way to show the work of the group of photographers she was involved with and the type of photography that didn't get recognition, which in that case was almost all photography except for dead photographers. So she had a lot of photographers in the class she was taking with David Vestal. She was very good friends with Lisette Modell and Gene Smith, who were established photographers. And in her class with David Vestal, there was Neil Slavin, there was Lilo Raymond, who's actually a local photographer, and Helen Buffield.
Excuse me for a second, there was a wonderful show at the Dorsky Museum of her work. So we're kind of all connected. Go ahead.
So this was her real interest at first, in showing these photographers. I was more interested in the teaching of photography and reaching into some of these other communities that really had no access. So at first, when the woman from Bellevue came with her group of psychiatric patients, and it was interesting. I always took photographs with the Polaroid so that they would have a photograph.
Access.
Well, they'd see themselves in photography. They felt comfortable with it, and I showed them how easy the Polaroid was to use, and then I handed them the camera. So one of the patients said to me, well, you can't take my photograph. And I said, well, why not? And he said, because I don't exist. So I took his photograph anyway. Because, you know, I figured, why not? And if I show it to him, he wants to rip it up, that's okay. So afterwards, you know, it takes a couple of minutes, and I stacked all the photographs, and I handed them cameras, and they took photographs. And then we reviewed the photographs at the end. And the photograph of him didn't come out.
Oh, wow.
The only photograph of all the photographs. And the therapist said it set back his therapy a little bit. But we pushed on.
Well, your mother, it was at the time that there were all of these ghost or spirit photographs.
She was a great believer in psychic and spirit photography.
Right, so that must have been really a serendipitous, synchronistic moment when this guy's photograph didn't come out. My God.
I've got to see some of the images that came out of the psychiatric hospital program. Some of them look like spirit photographs, except, you know, in very unsettling sorts of ways.
Right, yeah. And well, your mother she used the fisheye approaches, all kinds of things. But let's go back to this prison and taking this boat up the Hudson.
Well, we had the boat, we heard about the Council on the Arts, and we wrote a proposal. We actually spent a couple of days, 2 days before the deadline, we heard about it, that it was available, and we had a poet from California that was working on the boat, just taking care of the boat, and he and I sat up all night and wrote the proposal. So we thought, well, we have a boat, we want to travel to places. We looked at places to stop, and there was Sing Sing Prison up the Hudson. So we wrote a letter to the warden and said that we want to dock there. And the proposal was in the winter, and he wrote back, and he said, well, you can't dock here, the inmates will escape across the ice. So I said, maybe I better come and meet with you and explain what we really wanted to do. Now, prior to that, we had an exhibition in Central Park called The People Yes.
From?
Well, the title, it was a large festival that the city Parks Department was putting on in Central Park. It included music and food and all different sorts of activities in the park. And then the Floating Foundation organized an exhibition, which was amazing. It was a week-long festival, and the Parks Department had these frames that they sort of stood up in the space. And then the show was literally installed and taken down every day.
And there was no vandalism.
And there wasn't really any vandalism of the photographs. It was amazing. And as part of the exhibition at the Dorsky here, I've sort of recreated in spirit part of that exhibition with these sort of temporary pegboard walls showing photographs. It's a bit unconventional for a museum, but it's again trying to kind of revive some of that. Some of what it felt like back then. I mean, I was really interested in curating the show in that kind of very expansive, generous spirit that seemed to guide
Which was
everything.
the time.
Yeah,
which
it was the time
yes.
period. It was all about the spirit of the boat, and I think it's time that we revive a little bit of that on our campus.
I think so too.
Beth
Absolutely.
did a magnificent job.
Yeah.
And even painted one of the walls purple.
I know, that is just great.
Which was really
you
my
didn't paint
mother's
the wall.
color.
But, yes, that
But I
was your
picked the
favorite.
purple.
But you picked the purple. Yeah, it is an extraordinarily wonderful, moving show. To see those people who didn't have voices, to see them speak, to hear their voices through the photographs. Really amazing stuff. And so you went up the Hudson. You didn't go to Sing Sing. I understand there was a very progressive superintendent there at the time.
Warden Cassell's,
yeah.
a wonderful man. Well, I went up to meet with him, and this exhibition, The People Yes, also went down to Mexico, where it was translated as Pueblo C.
Oh, Pueblo City, right.
It was in Chapultepec Park in the center of Mexico City.
Oh, how
so
great.
we had the exhibition in English and Spanish. So then when I met with the warden, he said, well, if you can get any of the inmates to sign up for your class, you can teach a class here. Now, there were no programs in prison at the time. So I brought the exhibition to the library, put it up in the library, and within 15 minutes, I had 200 signatures of people that wanted to take the class. And my good friend from high school, Mauricio Webelman, was taking a year in New York studying, and he came in as a volunteer and was teaching in Spanish at the prison.
Oh, terrific. By the way, the title comes from Carl Sandburg's epic
Of the
poem.
People, yes.
Yes, The People, yeah. So it has roots there, too. It's
Which I've got to say, in the conversation area in the exhibition, we have a number of books, mostly about photography, but I have a copy of this book-length poem by Carl Sandburg, which was written in the depths of the Depression in the 30s. And I've got to say, leafing through that poem recently, it's been a little sort of deja vu all over again with some of the observations that he makes in that book.
Resonance, yes, yeah. So that's very important. So you went.
Well, we had the program at Sing Sing, and again, we started with the Polaroid, then we had the Diana F camera, and then we went on to the 35mm camera, and they allowed us to put in a darkroom, which was unbelievable in
At the prison? Wow.
Well, Warden Cassell's really believed in art. I mean, he didn't really quite understand photography as art, but he did believe in painting, and there was a painting program there.
Right.
And I tried to get other people to come, but prisons really weren't in style. I mean, Attica hadn't happened, and you couldn't really get people to go up to Ossining, which had changed its name from Sing Sing because it didn't want to be associated with Sing Sing,
That's
which means
right.
rock upon rock.
Sing
I happen
Sing.
to know since I did the book, Sing Sing, the
That's right,
View
you
from
did that
Within.
book. Yes.
But
Yeah.
I mean, I really believe that the photography did give access to the students and gave them an opportunity to communicate. And I also had this feeling that we had at that time that we could do anything and that we could go to prison. We didn't really think of what was involved. Well, there was Sing Sing, it was on the Hudson. We'll write to the warden, we'll go do a program there.
Right, there were very few obstacles. It was just the dream that was being realized in the late 60s, early 70s.
I think the obstacles were there, but if you didn't see them, they didn't exist.
And that was part of this expansive spirit that I'm talking about. This just sort of, well, let's go do that. You know, this is an interesting thing to do. Let's
Yes,
just
we
go do
can.
it. Yes, we can.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Right, so it's coming back.
I
so
mean, we had a festival in the 79th Street Boat Basin. And so we had an exhibition called Neighbors on the Block happening. And we had this exhibition, and I ended up, that's how I met my wife. I hired her
Joan Miller.
Joan Miller to go into the SRO single room occupancy hotels on the Upper West Side. And at the time I was teaching juvenile delinquents and other gangster kids, and with Goddard Riverside, a teaching program there. And which is how I ended up here, because they had a camp.
I taught there. I was a counselor there in 1962. This is weird. Yes.
So in any case, I mean, that's how I ended up in the Hudson Valley, because I came
Not
up
in
here.
the river, thank God. No, I'm only kidding.
But okay, there we had a festival in the 79th Street Boat Basin.
All right, we're going to come back to the festival, because that's what we need, more and more festivals. We'll be right back.
Take a step up in your career with a master's degree from SUNY New Paltz. The Graduate School at SUNY New Paltz offers masters in a variety of fields, including business, education, science and engineering, fine and performing arts, and nursing. Our faculty will help you advance your career, and our classes are geared to fit your schedule. A master's degree from SUNY New Paltz. It's what your career needs.
Welcome back. I'm Abigail Robin, your host for On Campus, and we have here Beth Wilson and Steve Schoen. And I must say, I cannot encourage people more, and I hope I am encouraging everybody more and more to go see this show. It is an extraordinary event, and it really is an event due to the curating and the videos that are going on, and really, we must see it. And it's running till April 8th. April 8th, and we're having different workshops around the show.
We actually have a panel discussion event planned for Thursday, March 12th.
Thursday, March 12th.
7 o'clock in the evening in the museum. We're going to have a panel discussion where I'll be there, Steve will be there. We also have coming up A.D. Coleman, who's a really significant photo critic from back in that period. He was one of the first major photo critics ever.
Oh, wow.
He's coming, as well as two other photographers who are in the show. Bob D'Alessandro, who does amazing photographs in the show, and you have to come see them to fully appreciate the joy that is Bob D'Alessandro. And Eva Rubinstein, who's another really interesting person who was very close with Maggie and spent a lot of time on the boat. And so we'll have all those photographers and Coleman, and I'll be moderating, but having sort of a group discussion, remembering what it was like back in the day, what photography was about then, what was going on
what politics were about
what the
then.
Politics, what the whole scene was about, and we'll be certainly open to questions from the audience, anybody who wants to come.
Great.
So I would
and
encourage
it will be
everybody
at the
to
museum,
come. It will be
beginning at
in the museum, 7 o'clock in the evening, March 12th.
March 12th. Okay, and you're going to have this wonderful panel of Bob D'Alessandro is quite something. Everybody should make sure that you catch his photographs at the show. Also, at the show, the reconstruction of the park, the festival at the park, which was called Yes,
The People,
The People, Yes. That is really exciting to see how you reconstructed that whole thing. So I just love it. I keep going back, and I'm going to have my students come and look at the show. And
I think Beth just did a magnificent job. She really did. And the problem I found with my mother's work is she really never got much recognition as a photographer. I mean, she was in the book Women of Vision. She was in Famous Photographers Annual. She was in several places, but she never really exhibited her work. She really felt that wasn't the thing to do with the boat as a vehicle, and I think that's a shame. And I think that Beth really respects her work and gives it the type of exposure that it really needs at this point. And for me, it's part of wearing this jacket. I have a plan to wear it to every major museum in the world and stand in front of blank canvases.
Beautiful.
And then my mother will have been exhibited in all these various museums where she deserves to be.
Oh, that's a wonderful statement for your mother, really. That's great. That's great. It's just a terrific accolade for her.
Well, she spent so much of her life, helping other people get recognized. I think it's time that she is. I mean, she gave the first show to Lilo Raymond on her boat, the first one-woman show.
Wow.
She gave shows to Peter Hujar and Arthur Tress, and a lot of people that are Neil Slavin, a lot of people that are pretty famous photographers today that exhibited on the boat. And when they were unknown, she used her friends, Lisette and Jean Smith, who really believed in the boat unequivocally. They donated prints to the boat, and we could use them in any show. So whenever we had group shows, we always had their names associated with the shows.
Yes, and you came up to Kingston. The boat came up to Kingston.
We did. That was part of the evolving grants from the Council on the Arts, that we really looked at places to dock the boat. And it was no problem finding communities that people really didn't want to deal with, that seemed to be on the waterfront, usually isolated on islands like Hart Island, where Phoenix House had several of its chapters, and we docked our boat there as part of a happening. We docked in Staten Island, which at the time not too many people went to.
Right.
We docked in Yonkers. We had a program with the Getty Center not the Getty Center that we know in California, but the Getty Center in Yonkers, and worked with drug addicts and other people that really don't have a voice and that society really doesn't want to deal with. And the photography gave them a voice. And then what we did always was we'd have exhibitions of the student work on the boat where the community could see some of these people that they really didn't want to see and see their work as art. And we always, we really...
Well, I remember one time a while back, Steve, we had a conversation and you said something to me like, yeah, we were interested in everybody on the boat except unless they were normal. Or something like that.
Well, I have to say
that's a big question.
My teaching programs seemed to always be with groups that other people didn't want to deal with. I mean, it wasn't
You were bringing
mainstream.
awareness, right?
I don't know if it was just my attraction to these environments. And part of that festival that we had with Neighbors on the Block, where I met my wife, who was in charge of one of the hospitals on Manhattan, Ward's Island, where we ultimately docked the boat. And then we did a lot of work in psychiatric hospitals with photography. And I felt a real connection between, and so did my mother, in terms of psychic and spirit work, in terms of what was happening in these places. And here was a chance for the people that were there to escape these very drab, very dark environments.
Imprisoned environment, right.
In prison and in psychiatric hospitals, which are prisons. I mean, have bars, and it was the same, or they were in drug prison.
Right.
Thorazine prison.
Exactly, yeah. It's a really big issue, but let's get everybody out to the Dorsky Museum to see Taking a Different Tack, Maggie Sherwood and the Floating Foundation of Photography. That show is running until April 8th. It is, as I say, extraordinary. The underbelly, the whole world is encapsulated in that show. And the importance of bringing the voice to people who don't have voices. So wonderful. Look forward to seeing you all at the show. Thank you for being here, our audience, and see you soon again. Bye-bye.